Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. Today, we're going to be looking at digital privacy, specifically how the UK's new Investigatory Powers Act, that's the IPA,
Right.
is making waves. And, you might be thinking, okay, I don't live in the UK. Why should I care? Well, this impacts you even if you've never stepped foot on British soil. We're talking about the future of end-to-end encryption, a cornerstone of online security that keeps your data safe from prying eyes.
Yeah.
And frankly, things are getting a little dicey. To help us navigate this complex landscape, we have our resident expert on all things digital security and privacy.
Great to be here.
I've been combing through some articles and research about the IPA and Apple's response, and it's raised some big questions.
It's not just a UK issue. The implications of the IPA and the choices tech companies are making resonate globally, and they'll likely shape the future of data privacy for all of us.
Okay, so let's start with the basics. For those who haven't been following this saga, what exactly does the IPA allow the UK government to do?
At its core, the IPA grants UK authorities the power to demand access to your data if they suspect wrongdoing.
Okay.
And the bar for wrongdoing is surprisingly low. We're not just talking about serious crimes like terrorism. Even minor offenses could put your data at risk.
Really?
This means they could potentially access your iCloud data, browsing history, location data, and even private messages,
Wow.
all without needing a warrant in some cases.
So it's not just hypothetical, they're actually requesting and getting access to this information.
It is.
That's a pretty significant level of access, especially without a warrant.
And we've seen this play out with Apple, which recently chose to disable its advanced data protection feature for UK users rather than create a backdoor for the UK government.
Right. Advanced data protection, Apple's super encryption for iCloud. What are the implications of disabling that? What does it mean for users in the UK?
Well, advanced data protection essentially puts users in control of their data. It uses end-to-end encryption, meaning only the user holds the decryption keys. Not even Apple can access the data.
Oh, wow.
Disabling it for UK users essentially reverts them to a lower level of data protection, making their iCloud data more vulnerable to government requests.
And Apple decided it was better to disable this feature than to create a backdoor for the UK government. I can see why they'd be hesitant to do that.
Exactly.
It sets a dangerous precedent, doesn't it?
Creating a backdoor, even with the best intentions, is like leaving a key under the mat for anyone to find. Hackers and malicious actors could potentially exploit that vulnerability, putting everyone's data at risk.
It's interesting because Apple actually has a fairly high compliance rate with government data requests. One of the articles mentioned a 78% compliance rate in the UK and even higher in the US.
That's right.
So even with end-to-end encryption in place for some services, authorities are still accessing a lot of user data.
And digging deeper into that 78% compliance rate reveals some concerning patterns. It's not just about the quantity of requests, but the types of data being requested and the justifications used. There's a lack of transparency, which raises questions about the balance of power between tech companies and governments, and whether our data is truly protected even with end-to-end encryption.
So even with end-to-end encryption, there are still ways for authorities to access our data.
It is.
That's pretty sobering.
And it underscores the need for a multi-layered approach to digital privacy. End-to-end encryption is a powerful tool, but it's not a silver bullet.
So what can individuals do to protect their data in this landscape? Are there any practical steps we can take to reclaim some control over our privacy?
Absolutely. Even if governments are chipping away at end-to-end encryption, the underlying technology, the math behind encryption, can't be banned.
That's a great point. So even if access to encrypted services is restricted, we can still encrypt our own data before it ever reaches those services.
Precisely. And there are tools that can help you do just that, even if you're not a tech wizard.
Like Cryptomator, we briefly touched on that earlier.
Cryptomator is a fantastic tool. It's a free open-source software designed specifically for encrypting files before you upload them to cloud storage services like Google Drive or Dropbox.
So walk me through this. How does Cryptomator actually work?
It's surprisingly simple. Cryptomator creates an encrypted vault on your computer. Any files you put in that vault are encrypted before they're synced to the cloud. Even if someone gains access to your cloud storage, all they'll see is a jumbled mess of encrypted data.
Okay, I'm following so far, but what about when I want to access those files again? Do I have to decrypt the whole vault every time?
Not at all. Cryptomator allows for selective decryption. Let's say you have a bunch of files in your vault, but you only need to access one document. You can download and decrypt just that one file without having to decrypt the entire vault.
That makes sense. It's all starting to click now. You mentioned earlier that Cryptomator is open source. For someone who's not super tech savvy, what does that mean in terms of trust and security?
Open source means the code is publicly available for anyone to inspect. Think of it like a recipe. Everyone can see the ingredients and how the dish is made.
Okay.
This transparency is crucial because it allows security experts to independently verify that the encryption is strong and that there are no backdoors or vulnerabilities hidden in the code.
So it's like a community effort to ensure security and transparency.
Exactly. And that's one of the great things about open source software. It's built on collaboration and trust.
Okay, before we move on to the global landscape of surveillance in part 2 of our deep dive, I want to circle back to this idea of the chilling effect that these laws can have on free speech. You mentioned it earlier, but can you give us some concrete examples of how people might self-censor online due to fear of surveillance?
Sure. Imagine you're a journalist working on a sensitive story. Or perhaps you're an activist organizing a protest. If you know that your online activity is being monitored, you might hesitate to communicate freely, to research certain topics, or to connect with certain people online. Host,
Yeah, that makes sense. I can definitely see how that fear of being watched could lead to self-censorship, even if someone isn't, doing anything explicitly wrong.
exactly.
It creates this atmosphere where people are constantly second-guessing themselves.
It erodes trust and can have a chilling effect on open dialogue and dissent, which are essential for a healthy democracy.
Right.
And it's not just about the actions of governments, it's also about the power dynamics between individuals and corporations that collect vast amounts of data on us.
Right. We've been focusing on government surveillance, but let's zoom out a bit and talk about the broader landscape of data collection. It's not just governments.
Absolutely.
Corporations are in the game too. And it's often more subtle, isn't it? We don't always realize how much data we're giving away.
Think about all the apps you use, the websites you visit, the purchases you make online.
Right.
All of that data is being collected, analyzed, and used to create detailed profiles of who we are, what we like, and how we behave.
It's like a giant data experiment, and we're the lab rats,
It is.
often without even realizing it.
And while some of this data collection might seem harmless, even beneficial in some cases, like personalized recommendations, it can also be used for more nefarious purposes, such as targeted advertising that plays on our insecurities, or even manipulation of our opinions and behaviors.
So it's not just about keeping our data secure from hackers or government surveillance. It's also about being aware of how this data can be used to influence us in ways we might not even realize.
Precisely. And that brings us back to the importance of awareness and taking proactive steps to protect our privacy.
Okay, so let's shift gears and talk about what we can do about all of this. What are some practical steps people can take to reclaim some control over their data and privacy?
The first step is awareness, as we've been discussing. Pay attention to the data you're sharing. Read privacy policies.
Right.
I know they're long and boring, but it's worth it. And be mindful of your digital footprint.
It's easy to click accept without really thinking about it, but those choices have consequences.
They do. And beyond awareness, there are also actions you can take. You can choose to use privacy-focused services, like search engines that don't track your searches, messaging apps with end-to-end encryption, and VPNs to mask your IP address.
Those are all good points. And for those who want to take it a step further, we talked about cryptomators for encrypting files before uploading them to the cloud.
Exactly. And there are other tools and techniques you could explore as well. For example, full disk encryption protects everything on your hard drive. It's a great option if you're concerned about physical theft of your device.
Okay.
The downside is that it can be a bit more complex to set up and might impact your computer's performance.
So full disk encryption is like the Fort Knox of data protection, but it might not be for everyone.
Right. If you're looking for a more granular approach, you can opt for per-file encryption. This allows you to encrypt only specific files or folders, which is useful if you only want to protect certain sensitive data. It's more flexible. But you need to be organized and remember which files are encrypted and where you stored the encryption keys.
Okay, so there are different options depending on your needs and level of tech comfort. But the key takeaway here is that we're not powerless. There are things we can do to protect our data and privacy.
Exactly. And it's not just about individual actions. We can also advocate for stronger privacy laws and hold corporations accountable for how they handle our data.
Right, we've been talking a lot about the UK's IPA, but this is a global issue.
Absolutely.
You mentioned earlier that many other countries are enacting or considering similar laws. Can you give us some examples of what's happening in other parts of the world?
Australia's Assistance and Access Act, for example, grants law enforcement agencies broad powers to compel tech companies to provide access to encrypted data. And in the United States, the Cloud Act allows the government to access data stored on servers overseas, even if those servers are owned by American companies.
So this erosion of digital privacy is happening worldwide.
It is, and it's often framed as a necessary measure to combat terrorism or crime. But as we've discussed, it can have serious implications for free speech and individual rights.
It seems like we're constantly walking this tightrope between security and privacy, but the balance is shifting more and more towards surveillance.
That's a good way to put it. And it's a conversation we need to be having as a society. What level of surveillance are we willing to accept in the name of security? And are there ways to achieve both security and privacy without sacrificing one for the other?
Right? Are we sacrificing too much privacy in the name of security? These are tough questions, and I don't think there are any easy answers. But the first step is awareness, which is what we're trying to do here today.
I agree. And beyond awareness, it's important to remember that we have a voice. We can contact our elected officials, support organizations that are fighting for digital rights, and make our concerns known.
Right? Silence is complicity. We need to be active participants in shaping the future of our digital world.
Exactly. And remember, every action we take, no matter how small, can make a difference.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive, from the specifics of the UK's IPA to the broader trends in data collection and surveillance happening globally. But before we wrap up, I want to bring it back to you, the listener. What does all this mean for your daily life, and what can you take away from this conversation?
That's a great question. I think the first takeaway is this. Your data is incredibly valuable. It's a currency in today's digital world, and it's constantly being collected, analyzed, and traded.
Yeah.
So be mindful of what you share online and with whom.
It's easy to forget that every click, every search, every interaction leaves a digital trail. And that trail can be used in ways we might not always anticipate or feel comfortable with.
Exactly, and that leads to the second key point. You have a right to privacy. It's a fundamental human right recognized by many international treaties and constitutions. Don't let anyone, whether it's a government or a corporation, tell you otherwise.
We often hear the argument, if you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to fear. But that oversimplifies the issue, doesn't it?
You're absolutely right. It's about having control over your own information and who has access to it. It's about the freedom to explore ideas, express yourself, and connect with others without feeling like you're constantly being watched or judged. It's about the right to be yourself without your every move being tracked and analyzed.
So it's about agency and autonomy in the digital age. And as we've discussed, there are steps we can take to reclaim that control.
Exactly. We're not powerless in this fight for digital privacy. We can choose to use privacy-focused services, we can encrypt our data, we can advocate for stronger privacy laws, and we can hold companies accountable for how they handle our information.
So it starts with awareness, as we've said, but awareness without action is meaningless. So what's one concrete action a listener can take today to protect their privacy?
Well, we've talked about a few different tools and strategies, but if I had to pick one, I'd say start with a password manager. It's a simple yet incredibly effective step you can take to strengthen your online security. It generates strong, unique passwords for all of your accounts and stores them securely so you don't have to remember them all. This significantly reduces your vulnerability to data breaches and identity theft. There are many great password managers out there, both free and paid, so do a little research and find one that suits your needs.
That's great advice, and it's something that everyone can do regardless of their technical expertise.
Exactly. And once you have a password manager in place, you can start exploring other privacy-enhancing tools and techniques we've discussed, like VPNs, privacy-focused browsers, and encryption software like Cryptomator.
We've covered a lot of ground today, but this is just the beginning of the conversation. As technology continues to evolve and the digital landscape shifts, we need to stay informed, engaged, and proactive in protecting our privacy. It's an ongoing process, not a one-time fix.
I agree. And it's a conversation we need to have collectively as a society. What kind of digital future do we want to create? One where privacy is an afterthought, or one where it's a fundamental right that's respected and protected? The choice is ours.
Yeah, it's easy to feel overwhelmed by the scale of these issues, but remember, change starts with each of us. Every action we take, every conversation we have, every choice we make contributes to shaping the digital world we live in. So stay informed, stay engaged, and most importantly, stay private. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.